My birth mom gave me up. Now she wants to meet my kids. But her real motives left me shaken, and then Hi, I'm Margaret, female, and I'm 38 years old. If you were in my position, would you give her a second chance or close the door for good? I never thought I'd be in this position. Sitting here, staring at my laptop screen, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. My whole life, every memory, every version of myself I'd built, felt like it was tilting on its axis. Because after 38 years of silence, she reached out. Helen, my biological mother. I read the email at least 5 times, but the words didn't change. The same lines staring back at me, pressing into my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. Margaret, I have thought about you every day since I gave you up. I have prayed for the chance to know you again. Please, if you can find it in your heart, let's meet. I just want to talk. It was short, simple, but it carried the force of an earthquake. I closed my laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head at once. Why now? What does she want from me? And why do I suddenly feel like that lost little girl again, wondering why my real mother didn't want me? Everything okay? I looked up to see Lucas, my husband, standing in the doorway, concern etched across his face. He had a book in one hand, a half-full cup of coffee in the other, but his focus was completely on me. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. I got an email. From her. Lucas's expression tightened immediately. Her. I nodded. Helen. He set his coffee down on the table and sat beside me, his arm resting against mine. After all this time? After all this time, I echoed. I turned the laptop back toward me and opened the email again, my eyes scanning over it for the millionth time, searching for something I hadn't caught before. Some hidden message, some unspoken reason why she suddenly decided to reach out. Lucas read it over my shoulder. I felt his body tense. She wants to meet you, he said carefully. And my kids, I added, my voice clipped. That was the part that sent my stomach twisting in knots. It was one thing for Helen to want to see me. I could deal with that. But my children? She had never been in my life, not for a second. She had never bandaged my scraped knees or rocked me to sleep during a storm. She wasn't there for my birthdays, my school plays, my heartbreaks. She wasn't there when I got married, when I had my first child, when I held my daughter in my arms for the first time and finally understood what it meant to be a mother. And now, out of nowhere, she wanted to be part of my children's lives? It felt wrong. Presumptuous. Lucas exhaled through his nose, his fingers tapping lightly against the couch. How do you feel about it? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what to do. He nodded, giving me space to think. That was one of the things I loved about him. He never pushed, never tried to force a solution. He let me sit in the mess of my emotions until I could untangle them myself. But this was one giant knot I wasn't sure I could ever unravel. I mean, I've always known I was adopted, I said, more to myself than to him. My parents were open about it from the beginning. I never felt like I was missing anything. I had a good life. A happy life. Lucas nodded. And now she just pops up like this? Like she has some claim to me? To them. I gestured toward the staircase, where our 2 children were fast asleep. She didn't raise me. She gave me away. And now she thinks she can step into my life, our lives, just because she suddenly decided she wants to. I shook my head, my anger flaring hotter with each word. Lucas studied me for a long moment. You don't owe her anything, he said gently. You know that, right? I let out a breath. I know. But, that was the problem. There was always a but. But she's my biological mother. But she might have answers I never got. But what if she really has changed? And worst of all, but what if I regret shutting her out? I bit my lip, trying to keep my emotions in check. I don't even know if I want to respond. Lucas reached over and took my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. You don't have to decide tonight. Or tomorrow. Or ever, if you don't want to. I nodded, but the thought still churned inside me. Because the truth was, I wasn't just thinking about me. I was thinking about my parents, the people who had raised me, loved me, given me everything. Would reconnecting with Helen feel like a betrayal to them? Would it feel like I was saying they weren't enough? And my kids, I would do anything to protect them. They were my world. And the idea of introducing them to a woman I knew nothing about felt reckless. I didn't know what Helen's intentions were. I didn't know if she was stable, or if this was some desperate attempt to fix whatever guilt had been eating away at her for nearly 4 decades. All I knew was that I had a family. A real one. and I wasn't going to risk that for someone who had been a stranger to me my entire life. I glanced at the laptop one last time before shutting it. "I'll think about it," I muttered. But the truth was, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. The house was quiet when I finally crawled into bed, but my mind was anything but. Lucas was asleep beside me, his breathing steady, but I lay awake, my thoughts spiraling. Helen had been watching me, following my life. How long had she been lurking in the background, knowing things about me while I knew nothing about her? The thought made my skin crawl. A sudden noise outside snapped me out of my thoughts. A rustling, a faint crunch of gravel. I sat up, my pulse spiking. We lived in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ever happened here. But now, in the dead of night, something felt off. Slipping out of bed, I moved toward the window and peeked through the blinds. The streetlights cast long shadows across the driveway. At first, I saw nothing. Just the empty road, the wind nudging the trees. Then, movement. A dark figure stood near the edge of our yard. My breath hitched. They weren't moving toward the house, just standing there, watching. A chill crept down my spine. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and nudged Lucas awake. "Lucas, wake up," he groaned, blinking at me in confusion. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside." That got his attention. He was up in an instant, his eyes sharp despite the grogginess. I handed him my phone, already dialing 911. I looked back through the blinds, heart hammering. But the figure was gone, just vanished. Lucas moved toward the front door, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't." He frowned, but he didn't argue. Instead, he locked the deadbolt, his shoulders tense. "Could have been a neighbor," he murmured, though he didn't sound convinced. "Or it could have been her," I whispered. The thought made my stomach turn. Helen had found me once. What if she wasn't done? What if she was closer than I ever realized? After that night when I saw the silhouette outside our house, the thought of Helen haunted me. I didn't know if it was her or if my imagination was just playing tricks on me, but one thing was clear: I needed answers. And the only way to get them was to meet her. I didn't sleep much after reading Helen's email. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possible scenario. If I ignored her, would she keep reaching out? Would she show up at my house one day, expecting a tearful reunion? And if I responded, what then? Lucas slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and steady. I envied that. I wished I could shut my mind off as easily. But this wasn't something I could ignore, no matter how much I wanted to. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I would meet her, not because I wanted some emotional reunion, and definitely not because I was ready to let her into my life, but because I needed to look her in the eye and understand what she really wanted. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to close the door on this once and for all. The cafe I chose was 20 minutes away from my house, tucked into the corner of a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't somewhere I went often, which made it feel safer, more neutral. Lucas wasn't thrilled about my decision, but he trusted me. Before I left, he squeezed my hand and said, "If at any point you want to leave, just do it. You don't owe her anything." I nodded, but inside, I wasn't so sure. I arrived first, nerves twisting in my stomach as I sat at a small table by the window. I ordered a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink, then sat there, waiting. My knee bounced under the table, fingers gripping the warm ceramic cup. Then the door chime rang. Helen walked in. She looked normal. That sounds stupid, but I don't know what I was expecting. A ghost from my past? Someone larger than life? Instead, she was just an ordinary woman, mid-50s, with soft lines on her face and graying hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She wore jeans and a beige sweater, nothing fancy. She spotted me immediately, and for a second, she just stood there, as if she was as unsure about this as I was. Then she made her way over, moving carefully, like she was afraid I might bolt. "Margaret." Her voice was soft, hesitant. I nodded. She sat down across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. I just nodded again, my throat too tight to speak. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. The silence stretched between us, filled with 38 years of unspoken words. Helen finally exhaled, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know how to start this. I've imagined this moment for so long, but now that I'm here, I don't know what to say." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Why now?" Helen flinched slightly, but to her credit, she didn't shy away from the question. "Because I couldn't carry the weight of silence anymore." I frowned. That wasn't really an answer. She must have noticed my expression because she quickly added, I was so young when I had you. 19. Alone. I had no family support, no stability. I thought I was doing the right thing by giving you up. I wanted you to have a better life than what I could give you. I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay even. And you never thought to check in before now? Helen's eyes filled with something, regret, maybe, or guilt. I did, she admitted. I followed your life from a distance. My stomach dropped. What? She quickly held up a hand. Not in a creepy way. I found out who adopted you. I looked them up, just to make sure you were okay. When social media became a thing, I kept track of you. I stared at her, my skin prickling. She had been watching me, knowing things about me, about my life, without me knowing anything about her. And now, after nearly 4 decades of silence, she wanted me to let her in? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. You say you followed my life. So you must know I have a family now. Helen nodded. Yes, you have 2 beautiful children. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. I'd love to meet them, she added softly. There it was, the part of the email that had bothered me the most. I set my coffee down, my hands tightening around the cup. You don't even know me, I said carefully. And you think you have a right to meet my kids? Helen's expression faltered. I know this is sudden, but I want to make up for lost time. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Lost time? Helen, you weren't there for me. You didn't watch me grow up. You didn't hold me when I cried. You didn't teach me anything about life. My parents did that. Helen's eyes darkened at the word parents, but she quickly masked it. I just want a chance, she said quietly. I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. A chance for what? To play grandmother? To pretend the last 38 years didn't happen? Helen inhaled sharply, like I had slapped her. But I didn't care. I had spent my whole life making peace with the fact that I would never know her. And now, here she was, expecting me to just let her in like none of it mattered. I pushed back from the table, grabbing my coat. This was a mistake. Helen's voice wavered. Margaret, please. I shook my head. I don't think you understand what you're asking of me. You weren't there, Helen. And now you want to waltz in and be part of my life, my kids' lives, without even knowing who I am. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. I'm trying, Margaret. I know I can't undo the past, but nothing, I cut in. You made a choice, and I made mine. I turned and walked out of the cafe, my hands shaking. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold air hit me like a slap. I let out a shaky breath, my emotions tangled in knots. I had gone there looking for closure, but all I found was a door I wasn't sure I should have opened in the first place. I barely remember driving home. My hands were tied around the steering wheel, my mind still stuck in that cafe, replaying every word, every expression, every moment I should have handled differently. I had walked in hoping for clarity. Instead, I left with more questions than ever. Helen had followed my life. She had known about me, my husband, my kids, watched from a distance like a silent observer, waiting for the right moment to step in. And now, after nearly 4 decades, she thought she had a right to be part of my life? No, it wasn't that simple. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I felt emotionally wrung out. Lucas must have been watching for me because he opened the front door before I even reached it. Hey, he said gently, stepping aside as I walked past him into the house. How did it go? I tossed my coat onto the chair and ran a hand through my hair. It was a lot. Lucas shut the door behind me, his face unreadable. Come sit. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to sit still. I wanted to move, to shake off the weight of that meeting, but I knew Lucas wouldn't let me brush this off. So I sat. And then I told him everything. The way Helen looked at me like she was afraid I'd disappear. The way she said she had been following my life, watching from a distance. And most of all, the way she immediately brought up the kids, like she had already decided that she was entitled to be in their lives. Lucas listened quietly, nodding in all the right places, his jaw tightening slightly when I told him about her request to meet Noah and Lila. When I finished, I let out a breath, waiting for his reaction. He was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, I don't like it. Me neither, I admitted. But I don't know what to do. Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You said she's been watching your life from a distance. Does that bother you? Of course it does. And her wanting to meet the kids? I swallowed hard. That bothers me more than anything. Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he he said. We need to be careful with this. His voice was calm, but there was something firm underneath it. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I know, and I feel like I should just cut her off now before this gets worse. But, Lucas raised an eyebrow. But I don't know if I'll regret it. There. That was the truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Helen had already taken up space in my head, whether I liked it or not. If I cut her off now, would I always wonder? Would I always have this lingering what if? Lucas let out a slow breath. Then take your time. But Margaret, whatever you do, don't let her pressure you into something you're not comfortable with. Especially when it comes to the kids. I nodded, my stomach twisting. I should talk to my parents, I said finally. They need to know. Lucas reached for my hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Whatever you need. I'm here. I called my mom that night. The second she picked up, I could hear the warmth in her voice. Margaret, sweetheart, how are you? I hesitated, gripping the phone tighter. I need to talk to you about something. Mom's voice immediately shifted. What is it? I took a deep breath. Helen reached out to me. Silence. I could hear the slight intake of breath on the other end, but she didn't speak right away. Mom, I'm here, she said finally, but her voice was different now. Quieter. She reached out, after all these years? Yeah. And I explained everything. The email, the meeting, the way Helen said she had been keeping tabs on my life. And then, finally, the part that made my mother's breath hitch. She wants to meet the kids, I said. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, absolutely not. Her voice was firm, almost angry. I swallowed hard. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that. Good. I heard her take a deep breath, steadying herself. Margaret, I don't want to tell you what to do, but this isn't right, she said carefully. She gave you up. We raised you. She doesn't get to just show up now and make demands. I felt my throat tighten. I know. And what does she even mean by following your life? Mom continued, her voice sharp. That's not normal, Margaret. That's invasive. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then, softer, she said, I just don't want her to hurt you. That hit harder than I expected. Because the truth was, I didn't know if Helen was going to hurt me or not. But I did know that opening this door had already shaken something loose inside me, something I wasn't sure I could put back the way it was. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my lap. I had expected my mother's reaction. It wasn't surprising. But something about it left me feeling even more tangled up inside. Was I being selfish for even considering letting Helen in? Would my parents think I was betraying them if I didn't shut her out completely? I didn't have answers. And that was the part that scared me the most. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling again. Helen had spent decades on the sidelines, watching my life from a distance. And now, she wanted in. I knew I couldn't ignore this forever. But I also knew that letting her in could change everything. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I told myself I wouldn't see her again. After that first meeting, after the way she spoke about my kids like she already had a place in their lives, I was sure I was done. I even told Lucas, that's it. I don't need any more answers. But I was lying. The truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I kept replaying her words, the way her face twisted when I told her she had no right to my children. I kept wondering, was she being sincere? Was she just a lonely woman trying to reconnect? Or was she trying to rewrite history to ease her own guilt? I wasn't sure which answer I wanted more. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her one more time. The second meeting was different. The first time, she had been hesitant, nervous. Now, she looked more put together, like she had something to prove. Her clothes were neater, her makeup carefully done, her hands steady as she sipped her coffee. But there was something else too. Something in her eyes. Expectation. I knew right then that this wasn't just about talking. She was waiting for something from me. How have you been? She asked, her voice carefully casual. I shrugged. Fine. Helen smiled tightly and leaned in a little. I'm glad you agreed to see me again. I know this isn't easy for you. I stayed silent. She hesitated, then sighed. There's more I didn't get to say last time. I folded my arms. Then say it. Helen took a deep breath. After I gave you up, She paused, choosing her words carefully. I had 2 more children. 2 boys. That caught me off guard. She never mentioned siblings before. They're adults now, she continued, her fingers tapping lightly against the coffee cup. But we're not close. There was something off about the way she said it, but I didn't interrupt. I just watched her carefully. She sighed, shaking her head. They don't visit much anymore. We had differences. Differences. A vague, hollow word. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. I live alone now, she continued, her voice softening. And I think about the mistakes I made. About the people I pushed away. That's why I reached out. Because I don't want to lose you too. Lose me too. The words sent a cold shiver through me. I sat back in my chair, my stomach twisting. Helen, are you reaching out to reconnect with me? Or because you need someone to fill the space your son's left? She flinched, caught off guard. She forced a small laugh, but it was brittle. That's not fair, isn't it? Her expression faltered, and for the first time, I saw something sharper in her gaze. Annoyance? Frustration? She smoothed it over quickly. I just mean, I want to be part of your life, Margaret. I want to be there for you. And for them. There it was again. Them. My children. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse picking up. Why do you keep bringing up my kids? Helen hesitated, as if debating how much to say. Because, she finally said, her voice softer. I want to be the grandmother I never got to be. Something about the way she said it made my stomach churn. I want to be the grandmother I never got to be. Not I want to get to know them. Not I'd love to meet them one day. She had already decided that she had a role in their lives. I shook my head. Helen, you don't get to claim that title. You don't get to show up now and act like you've earned it. Helen's face stiffened. I'm not trying to claim anything, she said carefully. I'm trying to fix things. Fix what? My voice was sharper now. You gave me up. That was your decision. You can't just undo it now because you're lonely. Helen inhaled sharply. That's not what this is about, she said, but I could hear the edge creeping into her voice. Isn't it? I shot back. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at me. Really looked at me. Like she was searching for something. Then she sighed and leaned back in her chair. You're angry, she murmured. No, I said. I'm realistic. A heavy silence settled between us. I let out a slow breath, my heart pounding. I need to think about what's best for my family, I said carefully. And I don't think letting you in is the right choice. Helen's expression darkened. You don't think I could be a good influence on them? I stiffened. I don't know you. How could I possibly trust you with my children? That did something to her. For a split second, something bitter flashed across her face. Something angry. But she smoothed it over quickly, forcing another smile. I understand, she said, though her voice was tighter now. You need time. I can wait. I exhaled, pushing my chair back. I should go. Helen's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Not tight. Just enough to make me freeze. Margaret, she said quietly. Please don't shut me out. I pulled my hand away. I already have. And then I walked out. I barely made it to my car before my hands started shaking. That wasn't just desperation. That was something else. Helen wasn't looking for a relationship. She was looking for redemption. She wanted to use me, use my children, to fix the gaps in her life. And I wasn't going to let her. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. I needed to talk to Lucas. To my parents. But more than anything, I needed to decide if I was going to let Helen back in at all. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if there was even space for her anymore. I sat in my car outside the cafe for what felt like forever, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had gone into that second meeting hoping, naively, that maybe Helen's intentions were pure, that maybe she truly just wanted to reconnect with me. But I saw it in her eyes, in the way she spoke. She wasn't here for me. She was here for her, for whatever guilt she'd carried all these years, for the children she had already lost. And she thought she could just slip into my life, into my children's lives, like she had earned a place here. I wasn't going to let that happen. By the time I got home, Lucas was already waiting. I had texted him before I left the cafe. A simple, we need to talk. That was enough. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but I could tell he was bracing himself. I dropped my bag onto the table, exhaling sharply. That bad? Lucas asked, watching me closely. I let out a bitter laugh, rubbing my temples. Worse. He straightened, his expression darkening. What happened? I sat down, suddenly exhausted. She told me she had other kids. 2 sons. But they don't talk to her anymore. Lucas frowned. Why? She was vague, I said. She made it sound like they drifted apart, or had differences. But the way she talked about it, I don't think that's the whole truth. Lucas didn't say anything, waiting for me to continue. I swallowed. And then she said she wants to be a grandmother to our kids. Lucas's jaw tightened. She actually said that? I nodded. Not meet them. Not get to know them. She already sees herself in that role. She thinks she deserves it. Silence. Then, very quietly, Lucas said, "That's not happening." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I know," I murmured. "I told her as much. I told her she hasn't earned that." Lucas let out a slow breath, rubbing his hands over his face. "Jesus, Margaret, I don't like this. The way she's talking, the way she's pushing, it's not right." I looked down at my hands, my stomach twisting. I should have never met her, I admitted. I should have just ignored the email. Lucas shook his head. "No, you needed to see it for yourself. And now you know." I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the lump forming in my throat. "She doesn't get to rewrite history," Lucas said firmly. "She doesn't get to claim a place in our lives just because it's convenient for her now." I nodded, barely able to get words out. "I need to tell my parents." I called my mom that night. The second she answered, I knew she had been waiting for this call. "Margaret," she said carefully. "How did it go?" I took a deep breath. "You were right." Silence. Then, "Tell me everything." I did. The second meeting. The way Helen spoke about her sons. The way she insisted that she should be part of my children's lives. When I finished, Mom exhaled slowly. "Margaret, this is manipulation." I squeezed my eyes shut. "I know. You don't owe her anything," she said, her voice tightening. "You don't have to let her in just because she suddenly decided she wants to be in your life." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "So I cut her off?" "If that's what feels right," Mom said gently. "If you think she's only here for her reasons, not yours, then yes. You cut her off." I sat in silence, gripping the phone. "I just don't want to regret it," I admitted. "You won't," Mom said firmly. "You'll regret it more if you let her in and she hurts you. Or your kids." And that was it. That was the moment I knew. I had to close the door. For good. I spent the next few days drafting the message. I wanted to be clear. I wanted to be firm. But I didn't want to give her anything she could twist into an argument. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank screen, then finally let my heart speak. "Helen, I've spent a lot of time thinking about our meetings, and I want to be honest with you. I don't think continuing this relationship is what's best for me or my family. While I understand that you have regrets, I can't ignore the fact that I've built a full, happy life without you in it. That life includes my parents, the ones who raised me, loved me, and gave me everything I could have ever needed. I appreciate the decision you made all those years ago, and I don't hold anger toward you for it. But I do take issue with the way you've approached this. Your insistence on being part of my children's lives, despite barely knowing me, has made me uncomfortable. My priority is my family, and I need to protect that. I wish you peace, but I need to set this boundary. Please respect it. Margaret." I stared at it for a long time. Then, without letting myself hesitate, I hit send. I shut my laptop, exhaling slowly. It was done. Helen didn't respond. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the next week. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe she realized she had pushed too far. Or maybe she was waiting, hoping I'd reach out again. But I wouldn't. I had made my choice. And for the first time since she had entered my life, I felt free.